This is Gesher, the program that's bridging the gap between the Jewish and evangelical Christian communities with conversations that matter. I'm your host, Ty Perry, ministry representative with the Friends of Israel Gospel Ministry, coming to you from sunny Las Vegas, Nevada. My guest today is Richard Green, the CEO and co-founder of Clarion Project, a nonprofit dedicated to educating Americans about national security issues. Clarion Project's focus is to protect the West from extremists who threaten our safety and security by exposing and reducing threats through media and providing intel to law enforcement. In 2017, Green founded the Clarion Intelligence Network, or CIN. This network fills a crucial gap in national security by monitoring and exposing extremist threats to law enforcement. Green and his staff frequently provide briefings to U.S. government and law enforcement agencies, members of Congress, and the news media. Through his work with CIN, he has become recognized as a national expert on white nationalism, far-left groups such as Antifa and Black Lives Matter, and radical Islamic terror activities. Richard, thank you for being with us today, and welcome to Gesher.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, Richard, just before we begin, as a matter of cultural sensitivity, I want to make sure that we note that you are our guest, and we're grateful to have you here, but the Friends of Israel and Gesher may hold views that don't necessarily reflect those of Clarion or of yourself, and so anything expressed here is entirely our own. So we just wanted to make that clear from the outset. But let's talk about Clarion Project itself. So your mission is to expose dangerous extremist groups and people that threaten the safety of America. And you do that in an interesting way. I just was at a briefing that you did at a local synagogue, and you talked a lot about the use of technology and intel. Tell me, first of all, how and why did Clarion come into existence?
Yeah, so it's an interesting story. Clarion was not something that myself nor my co-founder, Rafael Shore, ever thought we were going to found an organization. It was really an outgrowth of success that we had. In 2006, we released a film, it was actually the end of 2005, named Obsession, Radical Islam's War Against the West. And that film, much to our surprise, it really was distributed far and wide. There was a special that aired 5 times on Fox News the weekend before the congressional election of 2006. We're number one rated basically throughout our screenings on Fox News. Was a special, an E.D. Hill special about Obsession. And then ultimately the film just caught more and more steam, and as the snowball got larger and larger as we were distributing it, meaning that we were going downhill, we just kept on picking up more steam, and it ended up that we distributed about almost 29 million copies of the film throughout America. So while that was happening, we said, well, we've clearly hit on something very substantial. Let's create an organization. And the organization was really, from our point of view, our perspective, it was here to educate the West about the true threats of radical Islam. We felt like we had a unique vantage point because we would see in the native tongue of many of the Muslim leaders of the time, from Arafat and many others, what they were saying in their own languages versus what they were saying in English. And we saw that Obsession, that was one of the really parts of the film that made a huge difference in the viewers, a big educational point, a tremendous educational point. So let's make more and more films like that. So that led us to making a film, The Third Jihad, about a moderate Muslim named Zuhdi Jasser. And if we're hard on certain Islamic organizations during the course of this conversation, it's because they deserve it. But not all Islamic organizations deserve to be called Muslim Brotherhood front groups. There are many that are not. And the ones who are not, we've tried to propel and we've tried to help. Zuhdi Jasser was the protagonist of The Third Jihad that we released in 2008. He has subsequent to that become one of the leading voices of moderate Islam throughout the world, certainly throughout the West. And I think that the film itself gave him a nice platform to do that from. We made subsequent films after that, and as we were doing these films, actually one worth mentioning was Honor Diaries, about the threat of just being a woman in Islamic cultures can be oftentimes a situation that is really really hard to deal with, right? In the West, our Western cultures are teaching us more and more and more. Oftentimes, when I was, let me think, when I was in my teens, I think the perspective on women's rights was very different than it is today, 20 years later, right? And that's interesting because the human rights organizations that monitor what happens to, in terms of equality of outcome for Muslim women, and that could be in the UK, it could be in America, where we have honor killings, we have FGM, female genital mutilation. We felt that was a story that really had to be told, and that film was called Honor Diaries. That was released on Netflix. Very powerful, shown all across the country as well. And we're really very proud of it, of that film, and all the positive we did for that community. As a matter of fact, there was a front page article in the New York Times that we helped to inspire from we're trying to get female genital mutilation, FGM, more widely, not just make it illegal, but make it understand that it's happening in communities here in America, the Somali community and others. And that led to a front page article in the New York Times, amongst other legislation that was helped to pass to help protect women. So I'm saying all that because it's interesting to know that we have done the most we possibly can to really try to help as many people as possible. And at the same time as we're trying to help people, we're trying to notify the public that there are certain organizations that are wolves in sheep's clothing. And part of what we spoke about, Ty, the other night was some of those organizations. So, but we'll come back to that. So as we were creating the organization, we also created a side of the organization that started helping with doing online monitoring of people who are quite radical. And if we would come across someone who was very radical and we thought represented a material threat, we would hand that individual over to law enforcement, and what we call an evidence package. Not that person. I think I misspoke a bit there. We would hand an evidence package over to law enforcement, and then they could decide if they wanted to look further into said individual or the individual that we had done investigations on. So that part of the organization has been going strong for a few years, and it's really blossomed into a big blessing, because we have been a part of perhaps I could say quite confidently many acts of terrorism that did not happen as a result of people who we had sniffed online and said, "Oh, something smells bad about this individual. Let's do a little more research." And then we found out that they actually were quite sympathetic to terrorism and wanted to cause mass casualties by either setting off bombs or going into synagogues and shooting them up, and so on and so forth. So at this point, Clarion's real mission is to expose and reduce the threats of extremism and to create a safer world. We create the safer world because we make these great documentaries that educate about the true threats we face, and we try to do the most we can for any group that is in danger. When it comes to child abuse, when it comes to ethnic cleansings, and we try to educate about that. And while we're educating about that, at the same time, we're monitoring different forums continuously to try to figure out if there are violent extremists out there that want to do acts of terrorism.
I think at the briefing that I attended the other night, you compared this side of what you do to the old days when you had a neighborhood watch party or a committee. And the extremism today, one of the great places to find these indicators and find the extremists themselves is online. So I know you can't go into real full detail on how you do it, but where are the kinds of places that these extremists and their extremist content are being made available?
Sociologically, you have to ask yourself a question, right? What happens online, right? What happens online? You're online, I'm online. Many people gravitate towards social media. I don't know about you. I don't do much social media. I think I understand some of the issues it has created in our society. With every good, there is a bad. It also helped with the Arab Spring that quickly became the Arab Winter. But it goes to show that there's tremendous power, almost godlike power, in the technology of social media. But at the same time, with that godlike power, do we have the godlike wisdom to control that power? And social media through AI and the algorithms that they use. I mean, if you think about it, Facebook. Let's just hone in on that on Facebook for a moment. Their profit motivation is to have you as intrigued as possible and have you click through as many sites as possible or as many links as possible to keep you on their platform, and that way they can create ad revenue. We also know that the more dangerous or extreme any message is, the more it's going to be 6 times more likely to get clicked on, right? So we're dealing with a situation where when we watch television, right? I don't know how much television you watch. I don't watch much of it, but when I've had I was in a hotel the other day and I turned on the TV and it was like it seemed like there was like 2 minutes of show and like 5 minutes of advertisements, right? But you know what? I knew they were advertisements. I knew that this was a commercial for this drug or whatever it is they were selling, a mattress, a computer. I knew it was an advertisement. But on Facebook, right, oftentimes we get manipulated. We know we're reading information and oftentimes misinformation that we don't even know is propaganda, right? So an example of that is that troll farms reached over 140 Americans a month on Facebook before the 2020 elections, right? So 140 million Americans, like that's a huge number. And if you looked on the top Christian pages on Facebook in October 2019, the first, I think, 15 of them were all run not by the people who you thought they were run by. They were run by troll farms, right? Somewhere out there, right? If it was in it doesn't matter where they were, but who was running them? The Chinese, the Russians. And that's a situation where you're being manipulated and you have no idea you're being manipulated, right? You can say the same thing about the African American sites. If you look at the same month, I think 2/3 of them were run by troll farms. If you look at American Indian, Native American web pages, you would see about the same ratio. So what's happening online is people are getting they don't even know that they're getting extreme viewpoints, but they are getting extreme viewpoints. And those extreme viewpoints, it's very hard to guard yourself against them when you don't even know they're coming in. Just like you knew the commercial was happening, but in this case, you don't even know the extremist viewpoint is coming in. So we're manipulated very, very easily, right? We're just so easily manipulated in those circumstances. Me, you, everybody. It doesn't matter if you're well educated, you're not well educated, if you're rich or you're poor, or you're just going to be manipulated. It's the way of life. So while you're being manipulated, you're also on this incredible social media platform, right, where your friends are at, and you can post things, and you all of a sudden, oftentimes you'll click on one thing. I always give the same example. Let's say you're a 14-year-old girl, a teenager, and you want to find keto. You want to find a diet, right? So you go on a website. You go on some forum about websites, or excuse me, about keto, and all of a sudden, then something else clicks in about something else that's more extreme than keto, and then you click on that, and then you start. Eventually, you go down into this rabbit hole of seeing people who are very, very skinny, and you start saying, "Oh, I should be that skinny too." And what started out with just wanting to lose 5 or 10 pounds has now turned into this complete dysphoria. Like, you don't know what you're supposed to even look like. Oh, well, okay. That same person starts hanging out on forums, right, for people who don't have a healthy outlook on food. Naturally, right? Okay, fine. The same thing happens in the extremist world, right? The same thing happens in the radical Islamic extremist world, in the white nationalist extremist world, and the far left. And then as they post, they rev each other up more and more and more, and they become more and more and more extreme. So what we decided to do was simply to the degree possible, just figure out what's being said on these platforms, and let's see who's saying the things that are the most egregious. And if there's anyone that we think is really could cross that line between free speech, which is it's completely free speech to say you hate another nationality, it might be repugnant, but it's free speech, to saying, I hate that nationality and I want to hurt them. Right? And I have the guns to do it. And I'm posting the guns online. And I'm telling you, and here's the bomb making equipment. It seems crazy, but this is what people do online. So when we come across that, this is an evidence package. We report it to law enforcement. And that has helped to stop many acts of mass terrorism. But let's go back to the social media, because one could think, hey, perhaps there's a way out of this. Perhaps you could just, Facebook can become really good at snuffing out the bad people, right? The people, the extremists. Now, I know there's a profit motivation for them to have clickbait, but let's say that they were this altruistic company, they've made enough money, and they're going to go ahead and figure out how to almost censor different these extremist viewpoints. Well, what all that ends up happening at that point, I'm not saying that they couldn't do a better job of this, but what happens is then these same exact people will go to other platforms like VK or TikTok or any other of these ones that are run out of China and Russia, right? And have you solved the problem? No. You made it a little more difficult for them? Perhaps. I don't know, but but you haven't solved the problem. And as you know, the more you're told you can't do something, the more you become entrenched in that position. So we're really up against something very, very powerful, which is why you need external organizations that are watchdog groups to monitor it. And that's kind of what we've decided to do.
Now, Richard, what are you seeing as far as the ideological spectrum? I know extremism, by its very nature, can come on either end of that spectrum. So what are some of the threats that you might see from the far right, or where is that coming on the far right versus the far left?
Well, on the far right, let me answer another question in answering this question, right? I spoke a lot about these troll farms and Russia and China, perhaps other nation states, funding these troll farms. The question is why, and the answer that I think is most palatable is that they simply understand that democracy only works when you have people that can speak to one another. I might disagree with you. You might disagree with me. I might disagree with a Democrat, or a Democrat might disagree with me, or a conservative, or a liberal, whatever the case might be. Speaking in generalities, not about my own personal positions. And somehow, throughout America's history, we've come to a consensus, and society has worked extremely well. We're an incredibly creative people, and we produce a lot. And if you one of my mentors once said to me, he said, "Do you have anything to be happy about today?" And I said, and I took a second, and he said, "How about your American passport? You happy about that? You happy about your American passport?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "You know how much people will pay you for that American passport?" And I said, "I don't know." And he said, "I don't know either, but I know there's a lot of people who'd like pay you a lot of money for it, So we've created this incredible society. Of course, we've made mistakes along the way, of course, right? But I think the reason why these outside sources, the Russians and Chinese, who are our enemies, why they are investing so much money in social media in order to polarize our population is because they understand you can't come to consensus once you're polarized, right? So the rose of democracy, they want to use the thorns of that rose in order to sow so much discontent and to marginalize and to continuously radicalize our societies. That doesn't always mean, well, I'm the Antifa member who's going to go blow up a police station, or the white nationalist who's going to go into a party and shoot a bunch of people, right? But even people who are become more and more disenfranchised and more extreme, there's less consensus, right? So you asked, what does it look like? What does it look like what kind of trends do we see online? So we certainly see in the veteran community trends. There are the community is a wonderful community. I like to think of myself as a tremendous patriot. I am not speaking badly in generality about our veterans. Very, very, very much the opposite. I have nothing but admiration for what and they have done in order to keep our society safe. They are the tip of the spear, and which keeps me and my family safe, and I'm extremely grateful. However, if one was trying to sow discontent in America, right, and they wanted to create perhaps a civil war, who would they go to in order to sow the discontent? They'd go after the warriors, because the warriors are the ones who know how to use weapons, right? So on the far right, we see organizations like the Boogaloo Boys, amongst others, that really think that civil war is imminent, and many of them are ex-law enforcement or ex-military, and that's a place where we see it dramatically. We even saw an uptick a few years ago of law enforcement officers that were getting the tattoo of 88. 88 means Hail Hitler, right? So I'm a Jewish guy, right? Like, someone comes to my house with an 88 tattoo and he's law enforcement. That sucks. That's not a good situation for me. That's not a good situation at all, right? So many of them have gotten fired once it became a little bit more public. But this is something you see a lot of. When it comes to the far left, obviously it was last summer we saw areas of Portland being taken over. We saw BLM. Something interesting I'll talk about is, I think a lot of the Jewish community and the evangelical Christian community listen to this podcast. So we had a war in Israel recently, right? How many months ago was that? It was about under a year ago, right? So every one of us, every person who's listening to this podcast, 99 out of 100, right, was appalled, and they said, we want to be pro-Israel, we want to help Israel, and we gave money, and we did all these things to help the Jewish state, rightfully so. Okay, let me ask you and your audience a question, right? I'm sorry, but I'm going to ask it, right? How? Not you, because I know you, but okay. What has the average person who was willing to give money? What have they done after the war died down, right? And the answer is not much, right? Nothing, not much. So at the same time that the war died down, you know what the other side's been doing? The other side's been the far right wing Palestinian side has been talking to Black Lives Matter. They've been talking to Antifa. They've been creating kinships. They're creating alliances. And they're doing this on the far right and on the far left, right? I see people on the far right who seem to have now glommed on to the Palestinian cause, and the people on the far left who have glommed onto it. And that's because that while we are very good in wartime as a community, they're very good in peacetime, creating, alliances. And it's happening right now while we're talking. So one thing that we have to be aware of, as everyone here is, I think, that's listening to this, pro-Israel, we have to be aware that While there is a peacetime, we also have to figure out how to make alliances with people of the like, right? Now, obviously, you're trying to do that with this, but you are doing it with this podcast and with having people like me, and I've seen some of the other people who speak for Jewish causes on your podcast, and that's a beautiful thing. But we can learn from our enemies, and our enemies are particularly good at it. So we have to figure out ways to, number one, educate BLM, people who are into BLM or Antifa, about slavery in the United States of America. Abraham Lincoln, he said this: we might never get over this, and he's right. As a society, we might never get over that. But what's happening in many areas of Islamic societies in the Middle East? They still have slaves. And for every one slave that came westward, 2 went eastward, right? And it's a huge problem that the Islamic societies have to, and the Middle Eastern societies have to also come to terms with. And Black Lives Matter have to realize that we've been trying to come to terms with it in America for many years, right? Have they even got onto the field to try to come to terms with it? They're not even on the field to come on to terms with it. Is this a natural kinship? Absolutely not. The far left, who are quote consider themselves feminists, right? So why is it that their kinship is with radical groups in the Middle East that do not promote women's rights, right? They don't even allow women to drive parts of it. Sometimes they don't allow women to go out by themselves. They have to have a male chaperone, right? And all the problems that creates in society. I'm going to get into that in this podcast, but so those of us who are in a position to try to make some of these kinships and to try to shed a little light, that'd be a good use of time.
Well, Richard, if you would, I was fascinated during your talk the other night about the involvement of Clarion in helping with the Afghanistan, I'll call it a debacle, a while back. Could you discuss that a little bit? What happened? What was Clarion's role in aiding the people who are trying to get out of Afghanistan?
So Clarion was very critical of the Trump administration when they made certain faux pas, abandoning the Kurds in Iraq. And we were equally, if not more critical, the Biden administration when he decided to leave Afghanistan in a way in which any thinking person would know that if it wasn't 1 week to fall, it would be 6 months. But there was no way that this was going to turn out well. So we were very critical of the way it was done. And as we went on Twitter and other media platforms, all of a sudden, people from Afghanistan who were afraid started contacting us. And they were doing this not just with us, but with other people who were doing similar things. But the difference between us and the rest was that we have this nice reputation in the intelligence community as being people who can get things done. We can handle large amounts of data. We're organized. So we started creating lists of these Afghanis who were asking for help. And we, at one point, had 30 volunteers, most of them out of the intelligence community, helping us vet and create these lists. It happens to be that when the contractors, meaning the civilians who had a military background, who were trying to save Afghanis, went over there, they ran into a problem with not having organized lists of Afghanis who needed to be rescued. So we started providing them those lists, and we got more and more sophisticated very, very quickly. And we also, in the fog of war, helped them communicate with one another by creating different chat groups. So if one contracting group would have satellite imagery and the other one would have something else that was necessary, we would make that connection so that they could help one another. And of course, without this communication, that was very hard to to understand the different escape routes, which escape route was still alive, which one wasn't. Was it safe to use this airport? Was it safe to use another airport? What was an exorbitant fee for having to pay a Taliban member to let you go through a checkpoint? All these things with communication, we had answers to. Without communication, there were no answers. So we helped facilitate that communication. In sum total, we helped to get out probably about 2,000 Afghanis. And probably upwards of 50 Americans. We still get messages from many of the Afghanis. We had to step away for funding reasons, for many reasons. You can only keep a mission like that going for so long. But I will tell everyone here, those Afghanis who I gave my personal contact information to, many of them are dead. Many of them are every night sleeping in a different place because the Taliban are after them. And we have not just Clarion, we've abandoned them, but we at least played a crucial position to help them when we could. The American government, the Biden administration, abandoned them, and we're seeing, and we will see more and more poverty, less and less food, more and more starvation, more and more people freezing to death, and the Taliban cannot govern that country. They cannot. They don't have that experience. When Nelson Mandela became the prime minister in South Africa, a lot of people who supported him were very angry that he allowed the Afrikaners to be part of the government, and he did that for many reasons. But one of the reasons was he told his peer group, he said, "Listen, we've never run a country before, right? They have. We need their help. The Afghans don't have that. The Taliban doesn't have. There's no one to help them run that country." And everything is falling apart. Everything's absolutely falling apart.
Well, Richard, if people want to know more about the work that Clarion does, how can they do that? Where can they contact you?
So we have a website. Just go to Google Clarion Project, clarionproject.com, clarionproject.org. Our newsletter is second to none. If anyone's interested in national security, and they want a one-stop shop, you get a newsletter once a week, and you'll have the information about the far left, far right, Islamist organizations, the things you need to know, the stories you need to read. You can spend 10 minutes on it and be just as more knowledgeable than anybody else, in your peer group, likely more knowledgeable than anybody else. Sign up for our newsletter, right? And that is the one thing that I think your audience should do. The more people know this information, the better. You don't have to watch story after story after story. All you have to do is get one newsletter once a week, and you're going to know about national security. So when you go to our website, go ahead and click on our newsletter, subscribe. Number two of this is we have our films on YouTube. We have our films on our website, the ones that we have the rights to put on our website. Watch the films. The number one film that everyone should go and watch right now is called Covert Cash. Covert Cash. And that's about the billions of dollars, with a B, given from foreign countries, nefarious countries oftentimes, to our American college campuses. And what that buys them. What does that buy them? Because money is free, is not free. No money is free. Some money is more expensive than others, and we have sold out our so many of our college students by accepting money from nefarious countries and then allowing them to propagate their messaging again in a way that we don't even know it's propaganda. We don't know the commercials coming on. It's just our professor that is now teaching. A great quote is that many of us have gone to college, to university, and you'll see the Katz building and the Schwartz building and so on and so forth. A lot of Jewish names on these buildings, right? And you think that that's so great, the Jewish, but the interesting part is if you go to the actual chairs of those buildings oftentimes, meaning let's say we're calling them the Katz building of foreign affairs, whatever, right? You'll see that the chair, the building was bought by the Jewish donor, but the chair was bought by perhaps China, perhaps Russia. So where the Jews bought the body, these other countries, nationalities bought the soul. And the soul of these universities oftentimes now is one that's completely anti-American, anti our values, not pro-Israel. And the film Covert Cash will teach you all about it.
Well, thank you, Richard. Thank you for your time. Thank you certainly for the work that you and all the folks at Clarion are doing to help keep us safe. It's becoming a more and more dangerous world all the time, and we need people like you and the people at Clarion to continue doing this for us. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'll say one last thing, that if anyone is particularly interested in what I said about helping to monitor social media, we have a big job ahead of us. And I'd like to expand our endeavors in monitoring, and that means that we need more analysts. So if anyone who has the ability to support this endeavor thinks that they're in a position and would like to learn more about it, then please go to our website. You'll learn a little bit more about it there, and ultimately perhaps donate to the cause. It'd be deeply appreciated.
Well, and again, listeners, that website is clarionproject.org. You can find more information about Richard and the work that Clarion is doing, as well as getting involved and supporting the work. Richard, thank you again for your time and for all you do.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Gesher. I'm your host, Ty Perry. For more information about me, visit ty-perry.com. For more information about the Friends of Israel, visit foi.org. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform to ensure you receive future episodes automatically. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Shalom.